half of the program. I'm going to introduce the speakers who are going to be presenting. The first person is Maheen Ahmed. She came all the way from New Jersey. She's a middle school English teacher, assistant director of teaching while Muslim. The vision of TWM, teaching while Muslim, is to confront discrimination, implicit bias, and institutional racism by discussing issues that Muslims experience in public schools. She serves a big purpose in educating and helping basically understand these types of issues in our school environments. And I'm going to let her come to the podium.
Alright, can you guys all hear me? Yes. Alright, assalamu alaikum everybody. I hope you're having a good day. Thank you so much for that intro, and thank you so much for hosting me. I'm very excited to be here. My name is Maheen Ahmed, and I am actually a middle school 6th grade English teacher from New Jersey, and this is my 9th year of teaching. So I'm very excited about this school year. And in my spare time, I'm also the assistant director of an organization called Teaching While Muslim. And I also do research for an organization called Reclaiming Muslim Educator Researcher Collective. And all of those things are going to make a lot more sense by the end, of what I'm done talking. So today, as mentioned earlier, we're going to talk about Islamophobia and how that shows up in schools and what we can do as educators, what we can do as advocates to help prevent that from continuing. So actually last year, I'm not sure if you heard this story, but there was a 2nd grade girl who was working on an assignment in class. She wore hijab every day. But on this particular day, the teacher yanked her hijab off her head and told her, "Your hair is beautiful, you don't have to wear that." And 2nd grade is like very young, 7, 8 years old. And obviously, the girl went home, distraught, told her parents, and the next day the parents showed up to school, like, how could this happen? How could you have let, this teacher do these things to this young girl? And that's just an extension of Islamophobia, because it's this idea that just because this girl is choosing to wear hijab, she needs to be saved by this teacher. This became a big deal because it happened in Maplewood, New Jersey, which is a famous town because Ibtihaj Muhammad, the Olympic fencer, is also from Maplewood, New Jersey. She shared the story and it went viral. The school goes under a lot of scrutiny, and it is a very diverse neighborhood. Despite that diversity, despite all this information that people know something about Islam and Muslim, this still happened, and this teacher still did this to this young girl. And the school had an investigation. I believe it's still ongoing. The school district asked our research collective to come talk on a panel about how schools can prevent instances like this from happening ever again. Recently, this teacher is now suing Ibtihaj Muhammad for ruining her reputation. But in reality, it's just her actions that were brought out to light, and she's upset that she's being held accountable. In another high school about 30 minutes north of this same district, a high school student was completing an assignment and asked his teacher for an extension, Muslim student. And the teacher said, "I don't negotiate with terrorists." Which, what may have been meant as a lighthearted joke, is still unacceptable because perpetuating the stereotype Muslims and Islam are associated with violence, with backwardness, and it just confirms those ideas. And may seem lighthearted, but when you look at the grander picture, these aren't the only examples of Islamophobia and anti-Muslim racism. These are all around us. And this is happening in New Jersey, which is known to be a state, very progressive, very diverse. So you can imagine how it's showing up in other places, how instances of Islamophobia and anti-Muslim racism are not even reported at times because people don't feel comfortable saying it. According to a study in 2017 by the Institute of Social Policy and Understanding, about 40% of families, American Muslim families, who send their children to K-12 public school reported bullying. 40%. That's almost half. And what's most alarming about that statistic is that of those 40% statistics, 1 out of 4 situations, or a quarter of all those incidents, involve a teacher. So the very person you would expect to know better, to be there for your child, that they're spending 8 hours every single day you would think they feel safe and comfortable, is now, causing harm and perpetuating harm against Muslim students, and they're the ones continuing Islamophobia and anti-Muslim racism. And so it is a horrifying situation, right? And that happened in 2017, and you can imagine we're kind of pretty much in a similar boat today. Just to clarify, like, what are these definitions? Like, what are we talking about? What are these instances that so many families are experiencing? Islamophobia, if it were to be defined, is a presumption that Islam is inherently violent, alien, foreign, or inassailable. It cannot coexist with the West, or it cannot coexist with other cultures. Khalid Beydoun, a famous author, kind of defined there's different levels of Islamophobia. There's on a private level, the one-to-one interactions. There's a structural level, or state-sanctioned institutional Islamophobia, and also there's dialectical. The very word itself, Islamophobia, makes it seem like the fear of Islam is something natural, inherent, like, oh, we just can't help ourselves. But that's not the case at all, right? These ideas and feelings are taught or they're fostered because they're left unchecked, or people are not making it a priority to stop these ideas from spreading. So what does that look like? What is Islamophobia, anti-Muslim? Islamophobia, actually, the other definition, the other word that's also used because Islamophobia is problematic in its origin is anti-Muslim racism, which basically means the expression of systematic discrimination against Muslims or anyone who's racialized as Muslims. As we know, the Sikh community was also persecuted after 9/11 because of the misinformed idea that both Islam and Sikh are the same. And so anti-Muslim racism covers all of that, and it's a synonym used for Islamophobia because it captures more accurately what's going on. And so what does that look like? So that would be not allowing girls to wear hijab when they're playing sports, not extra random checks at the airport, comments here and there, off-color comments that demean Islam and Muslims that are just perceived as normal. Not including, it's also Islamophobia or anti-Muslim racism is also about what's not said as well. So not including Muslim holidays when all other holidays are included. Or the othering of Islam and Muslims, making faces, even when those topics are brought up. And so even if I were to ask the audience right now, like, raise your hand if you have experienced Islamophobia in some capacity. In any place, whether your school or your workplace, I'm sure you all have stories. Right, we could go for days. That was last Tuesday. What are you talking about? That was yesterday. Right, so we have all these stories, and it's because these ideas are perpetuated. Even just perpetuating the idea that Muslims are all about despair, war, and sorrow or violence. Like, these are not okay to perpetuate. And like as a previous speaker was talking about, there's so much history to Islam, and because sometimes we ourselves don't know it, then how can we expect other people to know it? And I know you don't need me to tell you what happens when these feelings or these ideas or thoughts, what happens to them when they're left unchecked? They escalate, they evolve, and we see that happening in India, right? It's like the assaults, the physical harm, the hijab bans, France banning hijab in sports, Switzerland banning the niqab, but all of these countries around the world that are banning things that are associated or related to Islam's the issues anytime the new masjid is being asked to be constructed. The controversy that erupts, like, why? It's just a religious building that wants to be, people are asking to be built. The double standards that come with feminism. A few years ago, I want to say it was maybe during the pandemic, the Norwegian beach volleyball team was like, you know what, we don't want to wear bikini because all of a sudden we don't like this anymore. And everyone's like, oh my goodness, this is like the pinnacle of feminism. People are standing up, and people are so proud of that beach volleyball team. Whereas the Egyptian beach volleyball team did that years ago and has always done that. People are like, what are you, Muslims were like flabbergasted. How could you have such clear double standards? Even what's happening in Iran today, the protests, against hijab and things like you see a lot of people, a lot of feminists in the West, celebrating that with glee that is like unmatched. Like, where is your energy, your commitment for social justice when all these issues are happening in India and things like that? But because the protests in Iran confirm your misinformed stereotype that Muslim women need saving, they latch on and they're spreading that. They're spreading that as much as they possibly can. But even the women, they do not want sanctions. They do not want people outside of the country to intervene. They just want to be themselves and have the freedom to do so. And it's important. So these are just horrible situations of how it goes unchecked. But not only that, understanding Islam and Muslims is an important part of being a global citizen. There are 3.5 million Muslims around the world, so our students are going to grow up interacting with Islam and Muslims, and if nobody is ever teaching them the accurate perception and the accurate understanding of these two things, they're going to grow up, acting on those misinformed stereotypes that they've seen in the media, misinformed ideas that their teachers, who have never critically examined themselves, are also then perpetuating. So understanding Islamic Muslims is not just something that we have to do because Islamophobia is rampant, it's something we have to do regardless. So how does anti-Muslim racism show up in schools? We've talked about what it is, we've talked about some examples, and we've talked about why it matters. And I know you know that it's extremely important. But how does it show up in schools? Right, so I teach in language arts, but when you look at school standards, there aren't really like national standards, but once upon a time the Common Core standards were something that all schools, or most schools, most of the country was following. We've since then moved away from that, but the standards in states are still very similar to the Common Core state standards that existed. So based on those standards, if you just look at that, like, where does Islam show up? And it doesn't really show up. It only shows up in social studies. And even in social studies, the only context it shows up is ancient Islam when it started, a little bit about the era of innovation, and then 9/11. So the idea is that Islam is backwards, ancient, and violent. That is a stereotype. That's what we're telling students on a state level, but including standards that don't address anything else, right? We were talking earlier about the Mughal Empire and how it's. I think that there's laughingly a paragraph in our textbooks, right? Even that, I remember my parents being so upset, like, this is not even accurate. So the information that's taught to our students in our schools does not address Islam and Muslims in a comprehensive way, and nor does it do it in an accurate way. And this is not to say that we want to proselytize students. You know, there's a fine line between just informing students about the basic tenets of Islam and what Muslims believe and how they behave. With the understanding that Muslims are vast, they're not a monolithic group. So that is one thing. The standards themselves do not address Muslims. That's one way that it shows up. The other way is that othering of Muslims, including literature or movies or media that show Muslim stereotypes. If you've read the story Kite Runner in high school, a lot of high schools still read that to this day, and that has so many problematic stereotypes, which is a fantastically written book, but if you're just teaching that book without any criticality, then they're also perpetuating those stereotypes. Referring to any Muslim majority country as a third world or backwards country, or any formerly colonized country, right? That's another example of anti-Muslim racism. Conflating Arab and Muslims. Muslims are diverse, we come from all different backgrounds. The erasure of Black Muslims and their history is also perpetuating stereotypes of Muslims being only one way. Connecting Islam to despair, oppression, war, those things may be happening, but that is not what Muslim experience is all about. Teaching about some ummahs, discussing Middle East, referring to any bearded person or a Middle East man as a terrorist, and we see that often, even just in jokes and conversations, students that might be making when you're watching a movie or you're talking about things. Not acknowledging Muslim holidays, and last but not least, this one's pretty nuanced, but even legitimizing ISIS as an Islamic state by using the word ISIS, right? Because it's views Islamic state when they're not. They're just a group of people who think they have some control. In Arabic, what an Arabic use, it's often just called Daesh, which is an acronym for who they stand for, and that's how it should be, because they do not have any authenticity to Islam. And so these are just some of the ways that Islamophobia and anti-Muslim racism shows up